Welcome back. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here. We're going to be talking about IFS again and Richard Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts. I'm going to kind of sum up for you chapter 2, why parts blend. So what is blending? Why do parts blend? What does that even mean? We get into the self and what that is in IFS. This is gonna leap us into some inner child work. So I will be doing my art interpretation of this exercise that is meditative. So it's a meditation. So we'll do the informative stuff, like what are we talking about here? The meditation is Unblending and Embodying. It's the third exercise in his book. I did go through it once and it did bring up the inner child. You know, I was brought back to my late teens, early 20s. And then I was brought even younger back. So this will all connect, I promise, and we'll talk about it. So we'll do meditation and then artwork. So my essential question is, how do I experience my pure self? And how does my inner child or these parts affect me in my daily life? Before we can answer why parts blend, we need to know what blending is, right? Blending happens when a part merges its perspective, emotion, beliefs, impulses with yourself. And the qualities of yourself seem to be kind of replaced with that part. So that is blending. And the meditation we'll do is called Unblending and Embodying. So we're going to shift perspective on these parts because there are no bad parts, right? That's the title of his book. So temporarily, when you are blended, you're becoming blended with this part. You become the fearful young boy or the little girl you once were. And so that's what leads me into the inner child work, to go back and see where these parts come from, or where these reactions come from. So some of us are blended with some parts most of the time, and we're just so used to that we don't even notice anymore that we are blended with these parts that are problematic. We just have this background sense, this is how he explains it, background sense that we are a fraud, shouldn't trust anyone, that we have to constantly work to avoid becoming impoverished. Those are the examples straight from the book. So we may not be consciously aware of these beliefs, but they burden our lives. So that's why and that happens when we don't go inside and examine and question and figure out what's going on within ourselves to meet our parts. So that's why this work is so important. So healing happens when self interacts with parts. And that came from a different reference. I'm going to put it in the description. 3 different ways you could think of self. In the more traditional way, it's the absence of parts. In other words, by asking parts to step aside, people automatically experience the state that we call self. In this state, people experience calm, clarity of thought, courage, and compassion. You could also think of it in the spiritual sense, your sense of self, your higher self, your inner self, your spirit, inner wisdom, inner being, things like that. A state of consciousness characterized by love, calm, and compassion. And then the third way to think of self is the undamaged part of yourself. We are more than our anxieties and mental health problems, and there is a part of us that is not damaged and that has not been touched by trauma. this undamaged self not only exists, but it's always available to create healing. You can think of it as any of those things. It's like your pure self, unclouded by traumas and things like that. The goal of IFS is finding the blended parts and letting them feel safe to unblend. Okay, so why do parts blend? We're going to jump back to the beginning, right? That was our first question. Why do parts blend? Protective parts blend because they believe that they have to step in to protect you. So maybe something happened in your childhood. They give the example of, if your father was abusive, then the part of you that becomes a protector feels that the worst possible thing could happen if they don't step in and protect you. And they feel that yourself, that we just defined, is incapable of that. So they step in, this protective part steps in because they believe the self cannot protect itself. So this might make you hypervigilant, overreactive, or even maybe somewhat dissociative all the time, or maybe completely dissociate when triggered. They can also become inner critics, trying to motivate you to look better, perform better, try to shame you into not taking risks. Others may make you care about everyone else before yourself and neglect yourself. So it can manifest in so many different ways, these protector roles in a traumatized system. So those are some common protector roles. If we think of these parts as young, usually stuck frozen in time during those early traumas, who believe you are in danger and something horrible will happen to you if they don't step in and protect you. And if we approach them with compassion and understanding, it is easy to understand why those parts would be stepping in and wanting to help, even though you feel that you're overreacting in a certain situation. There's something to be said about having gratitude toward these parts that are just trying to do their best for you. Some parts are always kind of there, and like underlying and sort of quieter, I would say. And then other parts only blend when triggered. So we experience rejection and suddenly shame is washed over us. A driver cuts you off in traffic and suddenly you're raging. You have to prepare to speak in public and you have a panic attack. Things like that. We know they're overreactions, but we don't know why we're having them because most of us don't dig deeper. My doggy's at the door. Most of us don't dig deeper and examine or question why these things are happening. So regardless of how blended we are, the self is still there and it's just temporarily hidden. It never disappears. So the self is strong, loving, an inner leader, and can comfort those parts. It comes with clarity, senses the self in everyone else. So there's a deep sense of connectedness, connected to spirit, where parts are usually lonely and disconnected. So if you see how if we tune into ourselves and go inward and find these parts and hold them and come at them with compassion and wanting to comfort them, how much healing could be done through that. A lot of meditation is helpful for this. They can be seen as unblending practices because you're mindfully separating from emotions and thoughts by observing them from a place of calm acceptance. So that's what we're going to do. You could even repeat a mantra that puts those parts to sleep so that you can access the self. And when you access the self, you gain this perspective. It's like you're zooming out and seeing the system and why it's working the way it does. And it gives you a lot more understanding and clarity on where these parts are coming from, and to let them know that they no longer have to fulfill these roles of, protecting you. They come to trust you more, so that they know that yourself can be the leader. They don't have to come step in and take over. They usually believe you're much younger than you are, so you can even tell them to turn around and look at you, or you can tell them your age, and we'll get into that more. So IFS offers a very particular approach to meditation in the next exercise, so let's get into that. Here I am about to lead you through this exercise, Unblending and Embodying. This is the third exercise in Richard Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts. The author says he does a version of this most every day, as do a lot of people who follow IFS. So it can be a daily practice. Get comfortable, take some deep breaths. Check in with the parts you're already actively working with and see how they're doing, if they need anything from you. And at some point, as you're getting to know them, shift and see if you can help them get to know you, the you that's with them now. Because most of the time, these parts don't really know you. Instead, inside, they've mainly been acting with other parts, interacting with other parts. And most of the time, they still believe you're quite young. It's not rare that this is their first encounter with you, the you that's curious about them, cares about them. Those are their C-word qualities. So let them know who you are, how old you are, because they often think you're much younger. And let them know they're not alone anymore, because you're there, and see how they react to that. If you want to, you can ask them how old they thought you were. You can also ask them to turn around and take a look at you. Usually they're focused outside. After you check in with the parts that you've been actively working with, you can call attention to any other parts and see who steps forward. What kind of thoughts, sensations, impulses emerge inside. And in a similar way, get curious about these and help them get to know you too. And the next piece of this meditation is optional, and it may or may not work. But if you go back to each of these parts one at a time and just ask them to relax in there and open up a lot of space inside your mind and body, so you can be more in your body and in your mind. And if a part's willing to do that, you'll notice a palpable shift in your body and your mind toward more spaciousness and peace. If that's not happening, don't despair. It may just be that they're not trusting enough to separate quite yet, and that's fine. But if they do begin to separate, go ahead and notice what it feels like in there. Notice how you do feel more embodied in your body. More of a sense of who you are. And notice the qualities you start to feel when you're in that place. What's it like now in your body and your mind? How much spaciousness and sense of well-being, or that you're enough, do you feel? And people often feel like there's nothing you have to do right now. Everything is okay. Some people feel a spontaneous vibrating energy running through their body. It could be a tingling of the fingers and toes. Other systems call this chi, kundalini, or prana. In IFS, it's called self-energy, which is a very healing energy. As we do this, I'm inviting you to get a real felt sense for yourself to be more in your body as your parts open space for that. If you can become really, really familiar with what this feels like, you can notice when you're not feeling this as you go through your day. And when you notice departures from this state, then you know they're usually due to the activity of some parts that are blended to some degree. Distracting thoughts, blocking the flow of energy, closing of your heart, pressure, maybe you feel pressure in different places. These are ways to notice. As you notice these, you can reassure the parts that are doing them that they don't have to. It's safe for them to unblend, at least during the meditation. And that when you're done, they could jump back to attention if they want to. But through this practice, parts gradually come to trust that it's safe and actually good to let myself embody more. And if they also trust that I'm going to remember them and check on them, be a good inner parent to them, that helps too. All of this, called self-leadership, allows them to step out of their parentified roles and unburden. So now I'm going to invite you to shift your focus back outside. But again, thank your parts for either letting you know that they were afraid to let you embody or for letting you embody. And come back when the time feels right. So here I am starting with a portrait of me when I was young, on my birthday. And so I started with an actual charcoal drawing. This is toning the paper, so I'm just rubbing charcoal into the paper to give it like, you know, a mid-tone. I usually do it much darker, but here I'm drawing and I'm using vine charcoal. So now this is a time lapse, so the rest will be a lot quicker. The vine charcoal is super soft, so it's very forgiving when you're drawing. So I use a kneaded eraser as well. I like stick erasers. They look like almost like retractable pencils or mechanical pencils, but with erasers, and they come in, I have two different sizes. One's a little bigger, one's a little smaller. So anyway, I just love this image of myself as a little one. And here we're skipping ahead to when I got the face right. So this is difficult, right, to draw portraits. This is what I do a lot of times. So if you wanted to just use an object to represent yourself as a young child, this method would be great too. It's like adding and subtracting. It's called a subtractive drawing because you're adding tone to the paper and then using an eraser to subtract. So I was thinking a stuffed animal would be a really good subject for that as well, for a childhood or a childhood toy. I'm in Photoshop now. I took a picture of my artwork, brought it into Photoshop, and I was gonna just use this warm light as the healing presence, as like myself now going back to this time and parenting myself as a young child, which is such a powerful thing. So thinking about this whole time that I'm drawing, I'm thinking about what would I have needed to hear or feel back then. Maybe more stability, just love and acceptance and those kind of things. So the drawing itself was healing, just to kind of appreciate my little self and, you know, where I came from and all of that. And then I decided once this drawing was finished up that I did want to add a current version of myself. So that's coming up here, super speed, so we don't have to sit through too much, but I'm using this current picture of myself because I really wanted the image of me now comforting my little self. And I think with IFS and a lot of what we talked about is like, hey, little me, look at me now. I'm 36 years old. I've got it together. I can handle it. You don't have to do anything. You can just relax and be, and I will take care of all of it. Because look at me, like it's like almost like that's the feeling I got. It's like, hey, young Callie, look at me now. Look at this Callie now, my current version. You don't need to help me. I'm good. I've got it under control. I've got it handled. So a lot of that came up for me, which is also hopefully healing to, you know, my little self. And this kind of solidifies that, like, parenting, you can always go back and parent your little self, and especially in those times of trauma. And Reiki really taught me that too. So I have to credit Reiki, where I was imagining these things, and this is just a solidified version of that. So here's the final product where I'm actually holding my little self. I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe if you're still hanging in with me. Have a wonderful day.